Well, now it's time for a review of what's making the headlines in the papers this morning. Dr. Constance, please take the floor.
Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Constance.
Are you okay today?
Heavy morning today.
It is a heavy morning. It is a heavy morning. Yes, we'll be looking at the stories that are shaping the agenda today for you. Let's kick off with this day newspaper. So in this day, the key theme from all Nigerian papers on the front pages today is the sentencing of Nnamdi Kanu, leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, IPOB. He was sentenced to life on terrorism charges, and according to the full judgment, he was convicted on multiple counts. The court opted for life rather than the death penalty in some counts. The court also gave him additional jail years for other counts. So this day here leads with that Kanu story that also reminds us that the trial took a decade to wrap up. This day further reflects on the insecurity hearing in the United States and how that country is seeking ways to help Nigeria to help itself. The window piece says Nest Oil secured a major win as court lifts asset freeze in alleged $1 billion debt dispute. Leadership, moving on to Leadership newspaper, reports on Kanu's case, highlighting the mixed reactions from the final verdicts of the court. And moving on to Daily Trust, which writes about the same story, while also talking about Jonathan's concession in 2015 that strengthened Nigeria's democracy, according to President Tinubu. The Punch has gone with Southeast leaders and their plan to find a political solution in regard to Nnamdi Kanu, the leader of IPOB. And we're learning that bandits that abducted churchgoers in Kwara are demanding a whopping 3 billion naira. Unbelievable. Again, criminality and business, that's what's going on. Now to security alert after bandit attacks. President Bola Tinubu in Daily Independent, if we can pull that up, has asked the Minister of Defense to relocate to Kebbi State, where the schoolgirls were abducted. Tinubu's government is under pressure to rescue them and secure their safe return. Broadly, the government is warning against framing violence in religious terms, emphasizing that the threats are rooted in criminality, terrorism, banditry, rather than sectarian conflict. Many disagree with the government, advancing the argument that there is indeed Christian persecution in Nigeria, especially in the north. And that precedes terrorism that started from 2015. On the economy, Daily Independent this morning is reporting that CBN has been asked to align fiscal and monetary policies to sustain stability, while Afenifere asked the government to overhaul security infrastructure. Vanguard newspaper has gone with the genocide allegation against Nigeria, reporting on U.S. Congressman Riley meeting National Security Advisor Nuhu Ribadu and security chiefs in Washington, D.C. And Anya Aganga Akonde others chart a way forward for Nigeria, speaking of national interest. On a lighter note, outrage over World Cup ouster time to kick out NFF, says one of the headlines here. And finally in Vanguard, Obafemi Awolowo's grandson Segun Awolowo dies at 62. May his soul rest in peace. New Telegraph reads about the U.S. House hearing and ASU and the federal government tussle in a bid to avert a nationwide strike. And Kwara church worshippers, abductors have placed 100 million naira ransom on each victim. Daily Sun says Kwara State has shut schools in 5 local government areas over bandit attacks. That's such an attack on education. It's unbelievable, especially for areas where they're already behind. But some see this as an attack on the education.
Absolutely.
Unintended consequences of criminality and banditry. And Senate, still on Daily Sun, Senate vows to end insecurity in the Southeast as leaders have demanded an end to open grazing. The Guardian newspaper this morning, let's pull that up, please. The Guardian goes with U.S. lawmakers questioning Nigeria's will and capacity to curb violence and next oil win in that debt dispute. Overall, today, security is dominating the Kanu verdict, of course, in the bandit attacks, terrorism, and the government trying to play up stability and counter-insurgency within Nigeria. So let's return to This Day newspaper. Let's turn to This Day newspaper to begin with that lead story on Kanu receiving life sentence. You know, apart from This Day newspaper, there's that thought of Southeast leaders talking about rallying for a political solution, you know, after this verdict. And of course, leadership did write that there is mixed reactions about this verdict, Yolanda.
Yes, there is mixed reactions indeed. But first, let's talk about what happened yesterday. Let's go a little bit into the details, because this is undoubtedly one of Nigeria's most politically charged trials, and it has finally come to an end, well, for now. So Justice Omotosho gave the verdict yesterday, and there was a 7-count charge. Many people are not in the know exactly of the details, but from what I read, the first was the terrorism against the Federal Republic of Nigeria, issued deadly threats to anyone who flouted the sit-at-home order, professed to be a member and leader of IPOB, fourth, inciting members of the public to hunt and kill security personnel. The fifth was to hunt and kill the families of these security personnel. The sixth was directing members to manufacture bombs, and finally imported and concealed a radio transmitter. Now, Nnamdi Kanu was enraged by the verdict, as he felt he was not allowed to pass his final statements. I think we all saw how he was shouting in court, very upset at the end of it all. Just a few weeks ago, if I can remind you, he chose to represent himself, even though he was advised not to by the judge. So now what happens next, we don't know. Will he go and file for an appeal after all of this, or will he resign to his fate? Now, former Senate President Wabara expressed shock over the verdict, and one of the key things that he mentioned was that Boko Haram leaders were sentenced to 5 years in prison, while Kanu is facing life.
Let me share, of course, there are misreactions, and a lot of people see it from different perspectives. But let me quickly share an insight from one of our viewers, which says here, there is a widespread assumption that Nnamdi Kanu's ordeal is driven solely by the federal government in Abuja. The truth is that it's more complicated and more revealing about the nature of political power in today's Nigeria. Some of Kanu's most determined opponents are in fact within his region and political bloc. For years, several influential Igbo politicians have built their careers on accommodation rather than confrontation. Their survival depends on quiet negotiations with whichever administration is in power or holds power. Kanu disrupts this arrangement. He speaks in a register they cannot match, drawing moral authority from a constituency that sees through the transactional politics lens of the region. His popularity exposes their compromises, their silence, and in some cases, their outright complicity. It is therefore unsurprising that the pressure to keep Kanu politically contained does not originate only from national security agencies. It also comes from regional power brokers who view his release as a direct threat to their relevance ahead of 2027. For President Bola Tinubu, already governing with a fragile national legitimacy and mounting economic discontent, these alliances matter. In that context, Kanu becomes a political bargaining chip, an issue to be managed rather than resolved. Legal decisions no longer reflect constitutional principles but political calculations. This explains the state's willingness to ignore court rulings, disregard international legal standards, and rely on judicial actors willing to produce outcomes aligned with preset expectations. In the end, it is not Nnamdi Kanu who stands judged before the global audience. It is Nigeria, and the world is watching. Emotions are high regarding this particular case. It has an opportunity to appeal.
Yes.
So we will see whether he appeals the case at the end of the day. So we will be bringing you more on that. Let's go to the second this day story here, which is about the hearing in the United States concerning that designation of Nigeria as a country of particular concern. We know here that the National Security Advisor, Malam Nuhu Ribadu, went there with a couple of other people in the team to push against that tag. In that hearing, there were questions about the scale of what is going on in Nigeria and whether the Nigerian government actually realizes and acknowledges what it's dealing with, not denying it. Corruption in the security forces was mentioned as undermining and eroding confidence, and police reforms was also a topic that came up during that hearing.
Well, Dr. Constance, I want to pick your brain with this a little, because for such a huge topic as the CPC, isn't it alarming to see that we sent, well, the best of what Nigeria had to offer in terms of a high-level delegation, and yet we only met with the congressman? Why were we not meeting much more higher up decision-making officials? I know that we also saw this in the past when Ukraine and Zelensky also met the same fate, where he went for negotiations, but he was met with like lower level, statespeople. What do you make of this actually?
Well, not everything that happens behind closed doors is reported in the papers. I do not believe that they're going to be meeting just one person. They probably will be meeting with a variety of different officers, policymakers, and decision makers in the United States.
But surely that would be highlighted.
It's just not one person. You don't get to hear everything that happens behind. And one thing also that is good to highlight is that Washington, D.C. is a capital that is known for powerful lobbying. When things like this happen, not only in Nigeria, countries move in there and hire lobbyists. So you're not the only one speaking. You cannot be the only one speaking. There are lobbyists that have the ears of the government, that have the ears of the policymakers, that have the ears of the people who are eventually going to move the needle, the people who are eventually going to say, this is what is going to happen. So my sense is that currently, apart from being physically present in DC, Nigeria probably has moved to speak to lobbyists who are going to be speaking on behalf of Nigeria and trying to see whether we can have arrive at a middle ground without having those terrible sanctions that might affect Nigeria very negatively. One of that congressman during that hearing did mention or did ask whether the sanctions would affect Nigeria in a way that it's unable actually to take care of all its problems or all the problems within the country. And so, yes, it was answered that it is a possibility. So at the end of the day, if this tag remains, or I think it will, the extent to which the damage is done will depend on how much we are able to negotiate, to lobby, and to get them to see Nigeria's side of the story.
Right. Can I just add that one other person has spoken up in all of this, and I think this was a very good voice to bring out publicly. Pope Leo, he acknowledged the same thing, that some of the sentiments that were said during that debate yesterday. He says that Nigeria faces a real threat and that it is everybody. He mentioned that it was not just the Christians that were losing their lives, but a high number of Muslims were dying as well. And this is not just coming from anybody. Please remember that Pope Leo was also in Nigeria. He was in Jos in 2016. That was when a lot of things were happening at the time. So he actually knows the context of what is going on in the country. So for him to say that this is not a Christian genocide, that has a very big impact, don't you think?
But Pope Leo has also spoken about the persecution of Christians. So we keep,
not in his recent statement.
No, he has.
Not in his. He recently gave a statement mentioning Yolanda, that many people are losing their lives.
Yolanda,
both Christians, both Muslims.
Yolanda, it is in the news.
That is not disputed. Absolutely not. The report is clear.
Pope Leo has said that Muslims and Christians are dying.
Exactly.
Pope Leo has also talked about the persecution of Christians and that it should stop. So
that
these
is
are
not
things,
in
again,
conjunction with what is going on at the moment. Those are two separate issues.
They are not two separate. They are two issues, but they are issues that are going on at the same time. And so that is why people are also saying, Nigeria, do not deny what is going on. Several things are going on at the same time. And everybody acknowledges it. Whether it's banditry, we acknowledge that.
Absolutely.
Whether it's terrorism, we acknowledge that. Whether it's Christian persecution, we acknowledge. So many different things. Criminality, pure criminality. People also asking to have a different country. Separatist ideologies also going on. So that's all out there that is being reported every day. Let's look at another story here in Daily Trust. Let's go to Daily Trust. In Daily Trust, Jonathan's concession in 2015 strengthened democracy. And if we go to the Punch as well, Tinubu governor celebrates Jonathan at 68. So the former president is 68. President Tinubu talks about or reflects on what he did in 2015. And it is good that this came up because what happened in 2014 and 2015 is part of what we are suffering today. Again, politics. Before President Goodluck Jonathan was defeated in the 2015 elections, there was that groundswell of opposition against him in 2014. You know, and then there was that the kidnap of the Chibok girls and how that all played out and how political opposition took advantage of the situation to work against Jonathan effectively, and how reports noted, you know, people brought into the country from other countries, from foreign, you know, countries to make sure to get ready to fight against Jonathan in the case that he decides not to leave office or he decides to stay put. And so a lot of the people that were brought into the country ready to fight, you know, from all over West Africa. When Jonathan, you know, decided to leave very honorable and very quietly, they were stuck in Nigeria and they're asking, what are we going to do now? And that is part of the problems that now, you know, culminated to what we are seeing today. So President Tinubu thanking Jonathan, I think it's surreal because he was in the opposition that was fighting against Jonathan. He was in the ACN and then the APC that wanted to make sure that Jonathan did not return to power. Eventually he left. One of the things that is worthy of note is that he went on to become this global statesman, you know, defender in quote of democracy, and the fact that the step he took allowed the country not to, prevented the country from disintegrating into total chaos, because it would have been chaos, you know, given what the opposition was planning, the mayhem they were planning to unleash on the country if Jonathan had held on to power. So he went on to become a global statesman, and here we are at 68, and he's been asked to return to the polls in 2027 to run again, because according to some political leaders in the north, they've now seen that Jonathan was actually a good man, a good person. You know how things, you know, eventually turn around to become what they are today.
Absolutely. I don't think there's much to add to that, to be honest, Dr. Constance. You know, just hearing that he clocked 68, and now President Tinubu is describing him, as you said, as the guardian of democracy in the light of everything that has happened. I mean, what can I say? This is just diplomatic relationships being kept and going on, and how he commended his conduct since leaving office. It was quite interesting to see, and with the word that you've used, it was quite surreal.
Let's move to the international headlines. We will start with the Independent newspaper. Many papers are leading with the official inquiry into the UK government's early pandemic response. And an independent inquiry estimates around 23,000 deaths, which were avoidable according to this report. That's in the first wave during COVID. Criticism is aimed at delays chaotic decision-making, and a toxic culture in number 10. Several titles call for accountability and reforms, especially around how future pandemics should be handled. Metro.co.uk with a damning headline, toxic, chaotic, calamitous. Same with iNewspaper, where the blame is thrown squarely on the doorsteps of former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. The inquiry into pandemic failures also raises broader governance questions. How well did the government prepare? And how are the lessons being institutionalized? Questions of legitimacy, of trust, of competence are likely to feature heavily in how the media frames the political accountability. In Daily Mail, this is being cast as a betrayal of Britain's children. And moving on, there's heavy focus on the upcoming budget scheduled for November 26th with Chancellor Rachel Reeves under intense scrutiny. Tax increases may come via less visible mechanisms, so freezing thresholds, new levies, and so on. In the Daily Telegraph, middle-class families face unlimited council tax. Again, a big problem for them. And finally, in Financial Times, there is the talk of migration overhaul, which is set to give big earners a path to settle their status. The big picture overall today is a government under pressure, fiscal constraints from downgraded growth, and public demand for accountability from the COVID inquiry, and security challenges from defense strategy. In everything is actually converging.
Indeed. The report that came out from the COVID inquiry was very interesting to hear and quite eye-opening, because now we're forced to look within and see how we can prepare better, how we can, analyze what we have gone through on a global level to make sure that we are prepared for a next pandemic that may come in years. Before now, I think the pandemic that we last faced before COVID was the H1N1. Do you remember it? The swine flu.
Yes.
I believe that was around 2009. That really shook the world because lots of numbers of people their lives were claimed, and same with the COVID. And so lessons learned from each of these. And I believe that this report is going to help in mitigating and preparing better for another pandemic that may come in the future. We don't hope for it, but surely the world must prepare for such situations.
I mean, there is already talk that there will be another pandemic, but that COVID-19 inquiry is an indictment on the Conservative Party, because what we have seen since Prime Minister Keir Starmer took office is the Conservatives on him all the time, saying that the Labour Party is a failure, that it is a weak party, it is not ready to lead Britain. But from what we see, part of the problems that they have today was created under the Conservative Party, under Boris Johnson and a couple of other prime ministers that was led by the Conservative Party. And so they talked about collective complacency during that period, that the government did far too little,
yes,
and far too late,
yes,
in the first few weeks of the pandemic and indeed beyond. So it reveals that urgency is paramount. Despite the tsunami of infections, there should have been urgency in the way that the government tackled the entire situation. But also, this segues into discussions about what happens in other countries, especially developing countries. Nigeria, for instance, we also went through the pandemic, and it was a difficult time for Nigerians, because when you tell people to, when there was a shutdown and you ask people to stay indoors, that's a problem. Nigeria is a country that a lot of people earn their living on a daily basis. And if the country shuts down, people will starve within a month or even less than a month. So that was a difficult one for us. But also, there were predictions that there would be catastrophe in Africa and millions of people would die. That did not come to pass.
That doesn't happen.
That did not happen at all. However, it also what happened also is a lesson for us to prepare for the next pandemics that could possibly happen.
And to show us that we need to prepare in a different way. You know, the way that lives may be affected in the UK or the US is definitely not the same. It didn't reflect here as well. Something I want to touch on as well that you mentioned, which I find very interesting, is that I think maybe continents need to look at ways to have these mitigation sort of measures that are tailored to their context. Remember when we had the cases of Ebola, and that really just shook everywhere and people didn't know what to do. And if you compare that to COVID, I believe on a global scale, COVID was more threatening than Ebola, which just goes to show that we're dealing with two very different types of you know, measures that we need to have to protect people in different parts of the world. So, yeah, go ahead.
Do you want to touch on that war of words between the White House and South Africa over the G20 summit?
Oh my goodness.
Because we saw the White House press secretary, you know, talking, you know, almost insulting.
Oh no, it was not almost.
Insulting the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, saying he's running his mouth.
Yes, running his mouth. Wow,
that was
such
really
a loss of respect.
Yes,
such a loss of respect for, you know, a low-level, you know, employee.
Really low level, employee.
Speaking that way about a president.
Yes.
I mean, if anybody were to do the same vice versa with Donald Trump or any other, you know, leading presidents in the world, it would have received such a different backlash. But this is the same thing with the CPC, because we were called a derogatory statement as well. I don't remember the word.
No, Trump said disgrace country.
Yes, exactly.
Well, that is typical Trump.
Yes.
That's classic Trump.
But that does that negate the fact?
It doesn't make it right. We're not saying that is how Trump is. But yesterday we discussed that G20 summit when the president cancelled his trip. And I was talking about the declarations and the decisions that are usually made during G20 summit. And I did mention to you that the US might at the end of the day veto because it is not there. But Cyril Ramaphosa is now saying that you are the one that chose not to be there. So whatever decisions that are reached here, whatever declarations are made here will be binding on all members. But Trump is saying, no, it should not be. So there's that back and forth, you know, concerning that. The most powerful country in the nation decides to do whatever it wants to do.
Absolutely. Well, that was a very interesting newspaper review today, Dr. Constance.